In this video, we're going to look at the use of online surveys. And so we see more and more of today is surveys that are completed online, whether that's using SurveyMonkey or forms in Google. There are lots of different different programs for creating an online survey. So the benefit of using an online survey is that you can send it out to lots of people, thousands of people if you want. So for example, you could have a very short URL on the bottom of a receipt or on something that gets handed out. You could have a QR code that sends them to a SurveyMonkey or to your Google form for them to fill out. So then it can be handed out to many people. Or you can email the link to your audience, and so you can get back a lot of responses. So for example, when we do negotiations, as I'm chair of our faculty association's bargaining team, one thing we do is we'll send out a link typically to a Google form or SurveyMonkey, asking them to fill out information in terms of surveys. So we'll send one out at the beginning of bargaining to say, what are your top priorities? What are your biggest concerns? So there it's exploratory. It's very open-ended questions where people can write in their top priorities and concerns. Once we hear from people in terms of that initial survey, we also meet with people in terms of town halls, conduct interviews. Once we collect that information, we then turn it into a survey to see how many people feel a certain way. So now we're looking at descriptive research to figure out how prevalent certain ideas are, how big a priority are they, ranking in terms of what's most important. The benefit of doing online is, one, we can reach lots of people. So all of the faculty, for example, and that's hundreds of people, 400, 500 people. The cost per survey handed out, of course, is quite small compared to the other research methods like interviews, where we are having to spend time or pay someone to spend time talking and getting the responses for each person. Even with telephone surveys, right, you are having someone collect that information over the phone, which is time, which means paying a person to collect that information. With online surveys, we send it out to everybody, they all fill it out, and many of these online survey companies like Google Forms and SurveyMonkey have automated analysis that they will perform as well. Some basics, right? They'll turn things into pie charts and bar graphs for you. Of course, more complicated analysis, you can export that information that's an Excel or a CSV file, and then you can do more complicated analysis. So the other thing that we're able to do is that we are able to get a higher response rate. More people will participate in the survey because it can be done at a time convenient for them. As long as the survey is fairly short, we can finish it in 10-15 minutes. We can get a higher response rate, and especially a higher response rate if you have a younger population or a professional population. So if you're trying to get leaders of organizations, you're trying to get lawyers or doctors to complete your survey, you'll get a higher response with an online survey than you will with mailings or others, although that executive interview can be used to get additional information from those who are even not filling out the online surveys. But online surveys, because of that higher response rate, because it is less of an inconvenience for people, we can send it multiple times to you, we can reach a larger group, they are really are the most popular. The downside, of course, is that if you have an older population, your older population is less likely to fill out online surveys. The other population that you'll have trouble contacting are those who are more concerned about online security, not providing information in an online environment. Now, in order to do that, we'll often have guidance when we send out an online survey. So I'll show you, for example. So here, this survey from the Faculty Association, so this is part of our bargaining a round or two ago. So it's been about 10 years or almost since we sent this survey out. But you'll notice that we have information here. It says this survey is being conducted using Google Forms, a US-based online survey tool. As a US company, all information collected by Google Forms is subject to US laws, including the Patriot Act. So one of the concerns is where the information is stored when you're doing online surveys. And so many institutions in Canada encourage individuals who are conducting this research to use Canadian-based online survey tools instead of ones in the US, because any responses that you put here in this survey would then, by US law under the Patriot Act, the US government could subpoena Google and collect what information is put in the survey. Okay, so one thing we do is disclose that there is that risk here. However, in this particular survey, it is completely anonymous. That is, all the questions here are about workload, but it doesn't really, we don't identify ourselves. There's enough people in all the different groups as we get to the very back end of this survey. Of course, because I'm not using the skips, it's putting me through everything. But if we get to the very back here, 10 years from now, the actual demographic questions that it's going to ask. Somewhere. Okay, here's demographic question. What school are you in? Well, you can see here there's a bunch of different schools, but there are 50, 100 faculty in these various different schools. And so picking which school you are in does not really identify you. And as we look at the other questions here, the only way that someone could be identified is that when they put in information in open-ended questions, that they're getting so specific we could tell who it is, right? Because what changes would you need to see to your workload? In this case, it's asking about what kind of workload do you need to do research, and open-ended. So people are aware here of the risk of that information being available online, being available to other people in other countries, to other governments. And so they can choose as they fill out this question here, how detailed they're going to be in that question. So we want to make sure they are informed when we talk about the security when filling out the form. The other thing is here with Google, you can see here that it is logging me in. By having that ability to log in with Google Forms, you can say start the form, the survey, and then complete it later, right? But you can turn that off so that it doesn't track people's emails at all to help them feel and truly be anonymous. The downside risk to this is that technically with Google Forms, if you don't have it so that they are logged in, then technically someone could fill out your form, your survey like 20 times, right? Because you don't know who is who. There are ways to get around this. For example, if you're Google Education, then you are sending your form to people that are within your educational institution. It will limit the responses for those, but it can keep it anonymous. With it also can track by IP address, so that basically when you send it out in an email, it can only have one response from that email link from that particular computer. And so that can help to eliminate the fact that you might have multiple people trying to complete the survey multiple times. So there is a trade-off, right, between having that true anonymity when you complete the online survey versus being able to complete the survey multiple times. And so these online surveys are trying to deal with that by limiting it to one IP address or one click from an email that location that got the link, but at the same time not fully tracking who the individual is to actually maintain that anonymity. So you need to make sure whichever online survey tool you're using, what level of security, what do you have in terms of protecting the identities of the individuals and the comments they make. And the ones that we're using Google Forms for, the information we're asking for, doesn't track the individual and doesn't ask things that are extremely sensitive in nature that would say put them at risk of credit card fraud or identity fraud, or ask them extremely personal information about like things like health, their own personal health. And so in this case with these, it's comments about your working conditions, and here it's more about the employer not knowing, whose comments are whose. And so the association is the one managing the account, not the employer. And when we summarize the information in our presentations or at the bargaining table, it's aggregated, it's anonymous. So you do have to consider what kind of information you're collecting and what kind of security is available. Again, like in Canada, we often encourage you use a software tool that is Canadian so that your data isn't being stored, or to look at how you are maintaining that information so that it's not at risk for disclosure. In later videos, we'll talk more about data governance and protections there as we get to bigger data and collecting more data from things like information systems rather than just here with our surveys, right? So here we should inform them what we're collecting and how it's being stored, and that way they can decide whether or not they want to disclose the information. We find in general, though, when it comes to online surveys, is that as long as your country has more than 20% of your population that has internet, then essentially online surveys provide the same or better responses and analysis than the more traditional methods. When it comes to online surveys, you can have screen questions that help determine whether or not the people who got the link to your survey have the requisite knowledge to be able to answer it. So you'd always kind of start with that very first question to see if they know sufficient information in order to complete the survey. And if they don't have the information, then it will end the survey for them. You can also, in your online surveys, you could put some of the demographic questions early on and have your systems, if you're paying for more advanced functionality, that it's only going to accept a certain number of each demographic group if you want some sample representation of different cohorts of people. You can use recruited internet samples. So that is, you can purchase essentially a list of potential individuals who could be respondents to your survey. So you could use, for example, a customer database. You could use, if people leave contact information who visit your website. So you're basically creating that pre-screened pool that you can pull from. And the key here is to ensure that they are representative of the target population. So you might collect information from customers, and then that might be the group that you are targeting later. You might collect information from people who show interest in your organization, and then you might request to survey them later. So the idea is that you can recruit this sample that you can then use to pull from. There are recruited panels. Some of the most popular for online surveys is where you can advertise or promote for participants and create a pool of potential participants through kind of promotion. And then instead of taking it from, an existing group that's related to your organization, here you're advertising for it. Of course, you've got to be careful about that we're not just paying people to participate and that they're not really relevant to our organization. There are random website intercepts, so perhaps you've seen like banners and pop-ups on websites that ask whether you'd like to participate in something. And with like SurveyMonkey, for example, if you fill out a SurveyMonkey form, at the end there's often an advertisement whether you'd like to answer some other surveys. And so in those cases, there's going to be some kind of screen question to identify whether you qualify for that additional survey. So if you're going to be doing this type of promotional thing, the survey is going to have to be short. And this is rarely used by professional researchers. It's because the group that you tend to get as participants are not very representative of your population, and they tend to be people who are in it more for any kind of prizes or draws, or they just think filling out surveys is fun. It's not so much about their interest in the topic itself. They aren't really seen as the ideal sample group, and so you rarely see this used by academic researchers. You can rent internet panels, so you can purchase kind of a list of potential people to respond to your survey from other marketing research firms. Again, the challenge we're looking for is whether or not these individuals have knowledge on our particular piece. Now, when you are doing an online survey, to increase the response rate, your survey needs to be short, right? 10 to 15 minutes. Minimize the instructions as much as possible. So you don't want to have lots of words that aren't part of questions. So really get to the questions. Make sure that you begin with questions that will encourage participation. You'll recall from our previous video about the order of the questions, right? We had a screen, and then we had a warm-up, and then we transitioned in. That screen and warm-up are important. Make sure that these people are relevant to the question that you're asking. And then that warm-up needs to be something that really entices people, engages them, and says, oh, this is a topic I care about, I have an opinion about. Make sure your questions are very simple. Use visuals and graphics like those graphic rating scales that make it a bit more enticing to look at and not just a bunch of text. You need to make it so that it's not super complex or difficult to navigate. You also need to remind them why you need their information. So you're encouraging them to do the survey and complete it. So if there's any kind of incentives, then how do they go about getting those particular incentives? The other thing is to make sure you really pre-test your online survey, because you need to make sure it works and works properly. Because if people try to go and complete your survey and it doesn't take them to the right question and it keeps skipping around, or the links are broken, half the answers I would look for are missing, people get upset, they don't complete your survey, and they're less likely to complete future surveys as well. When you are creating an online questionnaire, it needs to be one that loads quickly. So if people hit a link, it needs to go right away to that website. Or if it's a QR code that's going to take them to that survey, then it needs to work right away and quickly and not be too complicated. It also needs to look good whether you are doing it on an iPhone, whether you're doing it on a desktop computer. So when you are building your survey, have people view it, have you view it from multiple different devices to make sure that everything is readable, that the size of everything is okay, in order to make people more likely to respond. If you are having it so that it is going to be a multiple choice where they pick one, then you're using buttons. Don't have more than 5 different options. Okay. If you have more than 5 options, then you need to switch to a drop-down menu when you are building your form. If you have multiple answers, then we want to use checkboxes. And if we're concerned that we may not have covered everything in those choices, then have an other option so they can write things in. As you are looking at your survey, we want to make sure that those choices are things that represent how people would be responding. Be careful about when you have your list of options, the no opinion or none of the above should always be listed last. We want them to go through the list and decide before they result to that. So let's take a look at, where's that one that we had before? Okay. So if I'm coming into this survey here, okay, so I have my basic blurb here that covers our ethics, who is doing the research, what are they going to do with this information. This survey is voluntary. You may skip any or all questions you do not wish to answer. You may stop at any time without penalty. The responses are anonymous. The survey should take 10 to 15 minutes. You can see here it's saying that I'm logged in, but I'm not sharing this information. This is so I could come back and fill it out again. If we feel that seeing this would stress people out because it would make it feel like it isn't really anonymous, you can turn this off completely. Please note this survey is being conducted Google Forms. So as we talked about before, the issue with Canadian data being collected by a US company. Notice we have a progress bar so we can see how far we're going as we complete the survey. And in questions like this one, we have an additional note that says, please select all that apply, so people know that they can click more than one answer. For others here, we can type them in, and you can, for ones where you're asking for numbers, you can have it set. Let's find one that has, you can have here, you can have validation. So here we're going to say it needs to be a number. It needs to be a whole number. When they go to write it in, if they don't write a whole number, we could say, please round to a whole number as the response. So if I go here and I write 3.5, see how it gives guidance on how to answer the question. So you can provide that information in the online form to help it match the type of information you're looking for. So you can set that here, and so we can specify number, whole number, and then the comment if it is not. Okay, so to create those, that's response validation. Oh, you can't see that because my face is covering it up. So let's here. So basically what I did, let's just go out. I clicked on the double ellipse here and then chose response validation here in this Google form. SurveyMonkey and other surveys have the same kind of ability. When it comes to questions like this one here, so it needs to be a number between 0 and 100, and so the validation tells them that if they don't type it in. When we have questions that our scale, on a scale of 1 to 7, how satisfied are you with your current workload? We can see very dissatisfied, very satisfied, and a scale in between. So remember, as you're doing that, think about how many different points on this scale is appropriate. Should it be 5? Should it be 7? What level of detail do you need to be able to make decisions? You don't want to put it at so much detail that one, people can't distinguish between 2 and 3, and that you wouldn't change your behavior. So really this one, it could probably be a 5-point scale. We have a little extra here just to add a bit of a nuance in terms of, maybe you're mostly satisfied but not all the way there. So we add that additional level. And you can see headers here. So as we get to that transition to a new topic, we have our header for that transition as well as our questions. And remember, as you're putting your questions in, easier questions toward the beginning of the section, open-ended questions toward the end because they require more effort. We want to do the easy ones first to get people more engaged and committed before we start asking for extra time. A new transition, and then our new questions. So notice in this particular question, they have buttons instead of boxes. That indicates you can only pick one or the other. And so you can choose yes, no, but we also have this I don't know option in case they really just don't know how their workload compares with other institutions. We're not forcing them to have an opinion when they don't. That I don't know option should always be last so that they consider the other ones first. I don't know if I have any write-in ones here. I may not have them in this particular one, but you can see different types of questions in our survey. So let's go back. So what we look at is, does that survey load quickly? Is it viewable nicely on different devices? We have buttons with 5 or fewer. If you have more than 5, so let's go back. And let me just go back to one. Clicky, clicky, that's 3. Okay. All right, so let's gonna change this. So there's a lot of options here. Let's suppose that instead of we wanting select all that apply, which is what the boxes indicate, if instead we want it to be where they pick one and it's a lot of choices here, we want to use a different approach. So multiple choice, 5 buttons or less, check boxes for all that apply, or a drop-down menu if they are choosing one. So we would remove this select all that apply, and there are a lot of choices. So when we look at this version, although I gotta find it. Oh yeah, it doesn't take up as much space anymore. So in this case, now I have lots of choices here. It should be in a drop-down menu like this when there are more than 5 and you can only choose one. If you are choosing all that apply, then it's going to be check boxes like this. But otherwise, we would have less than 5 options or turn it into a drop-down like that in order to make it easier for people to see and complete the survey. All right, what else we got here? All right, drop-down menus, check boxes, and then that other write-in option is you can put it in. So if you are concerned that your list is not exhaustive enough and doesn't cover everything, then you would have like here, see where they can do other and they can write it in. When we do our analysis, when we clean and analyze our data, we will actually have to pull the other out of this list and analyze it as a completely separate variable, as if it's a completely different question than the others, because many people will not write in a response. And so we'll have to look at how many responded to the existing list. And then we use the other list in terms of analyzing it more like we would qualitative or text-based data, where we are looking for more brainstorming ideas, not a consensus across the entire group. So we do have this other option if we're concerned that this is not exhaustive, but recognizing that it's going to have to be analyzed completely separate from everything else. Okay, so we need to be able to create an online questionnaire, and you should be able to create one in, say, Google Forms or in SurveyMonkey to make sure you have your blurbs that are required by ethics, that you can put your questions in the appropriate order and word them appropriately, and then that you can check to make sure that it does create an online questionnaire that people are able to use and that is accessible and readable. So always double check your list here as you're finalizing your online questionnaire.